And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Distributed Tea Time. I'm Aydrian Howard,
I'm Rob Reid.
and we are excited to be here for the next hour to talk about Cockroach DB things, talk about distributed database things, answer any questions that you might have, and go through a demo. But first, who are we? Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Rob Reid, technical evangelist at Cockroach Labs. I have a background in developing backend systems, primary backend systems, with a smidge of interacting with databases as well. So probably not fully qualified for this, but hopefully enough that I won't disappoint anyone. Adrian?
Oh no, I think you're very qualified. Lots of relevant work experience. Hi, I'm Aydrian Howard. I'm a developer advocate at Cockroach Labs. I am located in Manhattan, and I am a longtime full stack engineer, even before we called it full stack. So front end engineer, back end engineer. Whenever Node came along, and now I'm really interested in Remix. So I'm going to be here for the application developers, and I write a lot of applications using CockroachDB, and we're going to be talking about one today. But yeah, I've been a developer advocate for about 8 years, and before that, software engineer. Awesome. So you did mention that you are in the UK, right?
I don't think I did. Maybe
Yeah,
not. No, I'm in the UK, about an hour out of London. So long enough, or far enough away from London that it's annoying to commute into,
I get it
but
now.
also far enough away that I can escape it in the evening.
Yeah. But at the same time, in this overlap that we have where we work together, I am having my morning tea. And
It's almost like we planned this, isn't it?
I
It would have
know,
been
right?
the audacity for one of us not to be drinking tea at distributed tea time.
And like I do want to mention that wonderful DB tips behind you, the play on PB tips, PG tips. I love it because that's actually what I'm drinking right now, PG
Did you
tips.
get yours on Amazon?
I do. It's very important to me that like I get it like from the UK because I need the pyramid tea bags and all of that stuff. But
With
what
full
what
experience.
what kind are you drinking?
Yorkshire. Good for
Yorkshire.
hard water areas. I don't know if I live in a hard water area, but it's nice and it's what we have in the cupboard.
So I was drinking that for a little bit because I saw a commercial with Sir Patrick Stewart, and I was like, if it's good enough for Patrick Stewart, then I'm gonna get it. But then I think PG Tips was on sale or something, so I go back and forth. Um, but anyway, hello everyone out there. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we will get to them as we can. But why don't we get started with what we're going to do today? So, for those of you who pay attention or tune into my stream on Tuesdays, the Casual Coding, I've been working on a charity activation site. So, a little background at Cockroach Labs. When we do events, we like to not go in very swag heavy. So, we're not giving out like, I don't know, little stress toys or pins or things that we think would ultimately go to the landfill. And so instead, what we do is we do a charity activation. So every time we scan a badge, we donate $3. It's usually $3 to a charity. And the cool thing is you get to select which charity. So normally we have about four charities, and we have like a little light bright board. And so you could give to Cancer Research or Women Who Code or Black Girls Code or UNICEF. And we got a Yorkshire Gold. Nice. And so you get to choose. And then sometimes we add in like a local charity. So we just did Red Hat Summit in Boston, and we added the Greater Boston Food Bank. So we can donate to that. And so I created this app as a way to keep track of those. Of course, all the donations are saved into a CockroachDB database, and then we have like a display that updates in real time, and you can see, where all the donations are going and how much we're giving. So, like a nice little app just to add to what we're doing at events and to kind of show off some features of the database. And I will show that off here real shortly. But also, I oh, lost my track. I'll show that off shortly.
Allow me. So
Yeah.
yeah, we've got this app. It's basically centered in one region for now. That was all Adrian needed at the start. But as the company grows, as we do read these kind of events around the world, it makes sense for us to keep the database up to date with that. So we'll move the database where it makes sense to ensure sensible read latencies and regulatory compliance adherence wherever we are. So in this demo, we'll be taking Adrian's application, which is the Charity Activations app, and we'll be essentially making it into a global app, at least part of it. We'll make the database part of it global. The application infrastructure won't change, or the architecture won't change, but this is one segment in that. And maybe in a follow-up episode, we can tackle the job of making that single region application global, because ultimately you want to do the same for both. Make sure that you're not accessing the application from one place and the database is in a different place. That wouldn't make sense. Right. So do you want to kick off with a demo of the app just to show people what it's all about? And then I can go through the process of updating the database to a global one.
Sure. Let me hit the right button here. Awesome. So this is the app. This is actually the admin section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going to what people at an event would normally see, which is a dashboard. And actually the easiest way is to log in. At Cockroach Labs, we use Okta, single sign-on, so I have it set up to where anybody in CockroachDB can log in. And so we'll let that sign in. And then we're going to go to a test event because we've got some test data in it. And you can see this is the dashboard that people see. So there's how many total donations, what that equates to in the total money donated. And then there is a nice little QR code. And if we take a look at this, you're presented with information. If this is an event that doesn't have a lead scanner, we can collect some lead information and then allow them to select a charity and hit submit. And whenever they do, it will be updated automatically. And there's a little bit of scroll here because this is designed to fit on a 12.7-inch iPad. So we have the little iPad sitting out here with this. And that's what it looks like. But on the back end, we have all of the different admin functions where we can create an event, customize it to what we need, select the charities we're going to support. And so in a nutshell, that's the app. And it's all being housed by CockroachDB.
Super. So, Adrian, you gave me access to the Charity Activations database earlier. Mm-hmm. So I guess we're in a position where we can start to convert this into a global DB, would you say?
Yeah. So cool. What would, whenever we're thinking about going from a single region to a multi-region database, kind of how do we start for that? I know part of it is we have to move the existing database, but then also we have to think about what regions and some other kind of overall settings to make that happen.
Yeah, so I did a video a little while ago, distributed SQL with great power. To fill in the blanks comes great responsibility. There are a number of anti-patterns you can fall into. If you just try to take your database and make it global, you're competing with the speed of light. You're competing with large replication latencies or read latencies between regions, because essentially you're saying, hey world, give me all your data, which isn't optimal. We've got different database topologies in CockroachDB that allow you to specify how you want your data to be read and written to in any given table. And that's what I'll be doing. I'll be basically backing up Adrian's database, which is in a single region cluster, migrating it over to a multi-region cluster, and then I'll be tweaking. I'll take you basically on the journey of tweaking the tables, adding columns to tables where it makes sense, in order to ensure that all of the table topologies for that database are as optimal as we can get them in a short demo.
And I just want to say, like, one more time, because this is very important. Today, what we're doing is we're migrating the database from a single region to a multi-region. We're not going to see a lot of lift from that until the application migrates from a single region deployment of the application to a multi-region deployment. So today we'll be moving the database into different regions, but you will also want to make sure that you have your application deployed close to those regions as well, so that way we can get kind of the full benefit of having a multi-region global application.
Yeah, because at the moment we'll be making the experience worse, because at the moment the application's in US East 1, the database is in US East 1. If I'm in the UK, I make a request to that region over the pond, it talks to the database and then comes back. If we have data in the UK as well, we'll be going to we'll be making 2 pond trips. We'll be going to the pond, to the application, which will talk to the database, actually which will return data to the application and then back, so it would actually be 4. So something to think about. And I don't think it's widely understood that this is going to be the case, at least with the people I've spoken to. So whatever we can do to clear that up, the better. So do you want me to start?
Yes. So do you want me to switch to your screen?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
So full disclosure, I will be copying statements from the left of my screen. So when you see me going over here, I'm copying statements because no one wants to have to watch me type out slowly. Some of these are longer statements. So what I have here is the multi-region database, and what I have here is the single region database. This is Aydrian's existing database in the States. This is a multi-region database. I'll show you the regions for that in a minute. But if I show you the databases, you'll see that the charity activations database we've got down here isn't up here, and that's going to be the goal of today. So I'll kick off a backup of this. I've configured something called external connections in both databases. So if I show you what those are, essentially it allows me to do a backup, do a restore from something without having to use credentials every time, which obviously in a demo situation like this wouldn't be ideal. So I can just say backup into this connection, which is S3, or restore from the connection, which is also S3. So I'll back up, you'll see what the syntax looks like. So it's back up into then my external connection and then S3. And what that does is that will back up into an S3 bucket. So that's finished. I'll now come over to the multi-region cluster, and I'll run restore database. So I just want to, you can choose what you want to restore. I don't have to restore the whole cluster. I wouldn't be able to restore the whole cluster because it's got other stuff in there which would conflict. So I'm just creating something that doesn't already exist.
And this is going to back up the schema of the database and the data with it?
Correct. Okay. And any foreign key constraints that exist within there. If you were doing an import-export, I don't think the foreign key constraints are taken across, but I'm lazy and I don't want to do that. So a backup restore works well for me because it's just a one-click thing. So I'm going to now use switch over to the new database and show the tables that exist. So you can see that by default, none of these tables have any locality information. It's because they were all in one region. We didn't care about having any locality information. But once I turn this into a multi-region database, you'll see that starts to change. So I'm just going to check that all of the foreign key constraints are still valid. Good. So we've got good consistency for all of our data so far. Now I'll show you the regions of the cluster. So this will show us that it is indeed multi-region. We've got 3 regions based around the world. One is in Mumbai, and there are 3 AZs within there, availability zones. We've got one in London, again with 3 availability zones, and one on the East Coast with 3 availability zones. If I try to show regions from the database charity activations, i.e. the regions that charity activations is aware of, there are none, and that's expected because it's never been a multi-region database before. So I will run 3 queries now. I'll be altering the database. I'll be setting a primary region. This will choose where the leaseholder preferences lie. But again, that's kind of immaterial because of the way we'll be configuring the database later on. And then I add the rest of the regions. So let's do that. It'll take a good couple of seconds to finish.
So whenever you restored the database, where did the data sit once you restored it?
Once I restored it, or before I restored it. So the data was in S3, if I've understood your question correctly.
I mean,
when I restored it.
So we restored it to a cluster that did not have any knowledge of regions. And so when you restored it into the cluster, did it just distribute it across all of it? Or?
Good question, really good question. So by default, if I'm not mistaken, the default table topology is follow the workload. So
Okay.
if there is no regional configuration, Cockroach DB will ensure fast reads and writes to the current most used region. So it's kind of follow the sun model.
Okay.
That isn't ideal for everyone, and it won't be ideal for this use case, potentially, especially as we want to domicile data or pin it to specific locations, as you'll see in a minute. So I'll select the regions now from the charity activations, and you'll see now that we do have the 3 regions, London, North Virginia, and Mumbai. And next, I'm going to create some super regions. So by default, and in fact, I'll share my other screen for that, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's switch over to Chrome. So without super regions, Cockroach will try to distribute the data as widely as it can. So data that is in North Virginia will be replicated to another region. Data that's in London will be replicated to another region. This is exactly how it would work. But essentially, you're not pinning data to specific locations. There'll always be read replicas that are outside of your region. And that's so that Cockroach DB can survive regional outages. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating super regions, and we're going to be restricting their placement, i.e. data cannot leave those super regions. So if you wanted regional redundancy here, you could create 2 regions within a super region. You can create as many regions as you want within a super region, and that data will replicate within that region or super region and only within that super region. So here we won't see any leak out of the regions into other regions, which reduces our ability to survive regional outages, but you can just add more regions if you want to.
Yeah. So if we wanted to include like US West, is it US West 1 or US West 2, to get better coverage over our West Coast, we can stick that into the super region for.
And that would go into that super
North
region.
America.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll go back to my other window. Let me find a better way of doing this. Right. So let's add the super regions now. First, I need to enable them because they're disabled by default, at least at the moment. And then I'm going to add 3 super regions. One is called US, EU, and APAC. So into US, we'll go North Virginia. Into EU, we'll go London. And into Asia Pacific, we'll go Mumbai. So let's add those now. And I'll show you what those look like. So for our database chart activations, we have 3 super regions, and into those super regions, there's a list of regions, but obviously at the moment we only have 1. So let's show the tables. Let's see what we're working with. And now you can see that where we had null in the locality table before, because the database is now multi-region or region aware, we've switched over to the default table topology for a region aware database, and that is regional by table in the primary region. So that means that this data will be regional and regionally locked to East 1. So if I try to use the database, I'll be making a pond hop and probably incurring about 89, 90 milliseconds of latency.
Okay.
So let's fix that. So let's go through the tables one by one. I'll start with users, and let's see what the table looks like. So I'm going to select everything from the users table, limit none, so we don't actually show any information. And we've got some personally identifiable information. So to me, that makes sense to, especially when you think about things like Schrems 2 and the ability for data, personally identifiable information, and it doesn't have to be named, it could be anything, to transfer from the UK to the States is restricted. So we can do that with super regions, placement restrictions, and like we're about to do now. So I'm going to alter the table and set its locality to be regional by row. I'm not providing anything else. This will create a column in the database table called CRDB region, and it's hidden. We can see it if we specifically ask for it, but otherwise it's hidden to us. So
we have a question in the chat while you're doing that.
Fire away.
So it says about the current topic, do you need to handle which region to hit in code, or will CRDB redirect those requests to the closest region? Say a UK request hits the cluster in the US.
Great question. So there is a global load balancer in front of the cluster. So you've got 2 options. You can either rely on the global load balancer, and that will redirect your request to your nearest region. And that will ensure that if you're in London, you'll be talking to, in this case, London, or Frankfurt if you've got another region set up and it's closer. But no, you don't have to you're very unlikely to hit a region that's far away from you. You can also provide your own URL with the region information in there to bypass that and go straight to the region if you want to.
So we have
So
one database URL that will take care of everything via
yes.
the global load balancer, or we have an option to augment the database URL. So maybe you have multiple deployments of your application, and you want to say, like, this deployment, we want it to go directly here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I typically rely on the single URL just because it's easier. If I'm in the UK and I try it, I will hit a UK node or UK region. If I'm in the States via a VPN, for example, it will realize that and I'll be redirected to a US based node.
Yeah, and for those of you who are new, like, yes, the database is made out of multiple nodes, but to the developer, it looks like one logical database.
Yeah. Important to mention. So I'm going to insert a new user into the database, just myself. The region's going to be the UK London-based region, and I'm also going to show this query, which is going to be an interesting one. So this shows where there are regional replication violations. So in the case where I've got super regions and I don't want the data to leak out, this query shows me, well, actually, your data that you thought was here is actually also being replicated here. And I can change that by turning on multi-region placement. So the multi-region placement policy allows me to set placement restricted. So this ensures that replicas don't leak out of the super region under any circumstances. So I'll turn that on. And now if I do a select from the table, I'll ask for first name and CRDB region, for example. So we've got 3 rows, and the query is pretty slow because it's having to go across regions. But this time, if I do a request for a local user, it's much quicker because CockroachDB knows I'm in the UK, and if I do this, actually, I can do select gateway region. I'm in London, so it knows when I make that request, it doesn't have to hop over the pond because it knows the data is already where I am. So that's the users table done. I can show you tables now.
And so because we've added that region, that's something that, like, me as the developer, I need to make sure that I set that correctly whenever the user is created, right?
Yes, exactly. So as you saw from my insert statement, where is that insert statement? There it is. Yes. So it would be here. Although if you're in the UK, or depending on where you are, you might want to set your app up to say, I'm always in this region, therefore, like, when my app starts, it is of type US, of a US app. You can provide that in an environment config or something like that. Or if you're hitting lambdas or serverless functions, you can always add it to the serverless function as well. And that's how we
be able to automatically grab it.
Yeah, and that's how the Silo demo app works.
Okay.
Maybe we'll put
so just kind of like pointing out things where, like, once this is made, this is what the developer will need to do to make sure that it's running optimally. We have a tough question from the chat. It says, do you know how much of a performance impact setting per row regions might have?
So if hopefully I understand the question correctly. So we're setting regional by row. That will tell CockroachDB to physically store data in different locations. So there will be low latency for reads and writes if you're in that local region. If I wanted to access data in the States, as you can see, what I'll do another request, but this time I'll say US East 1, because that data is physically stored in the States. There's a 90 millisecond delay, whereas if I get the data from London, the data is much quicker. I'm only having to make a hop to my local region data center. So there is a lag there, a latency, because the data is physically having to be moved. And if I were to do a select star and we had more regions, it would have to collect that information and bring it to us. But it makes sense to apply the regional by row topology in this case, because we don't want data in the UK to transfer over or to be physically stored in the States or Mumbai in this case. So it's a trade-off, and you'll see in a minute. I'm about to create a global table as well, and I'll talk about the benefits and drawbacks of that as well.
And one thing to mention is every one of our nodes is both read and write. So we don't have, like, primary, or we don't have global reads and a single write. So if whatever your closest node is, that's where you're going to write to, and so you're not going to see that latency because we see a clarification. So like say an insert to a single region cluster versus a dual or tri-region cluster.
Yeah, so you might not hit so there's a concept of a gateway node, and every node can be a gateway node. It's exactly the same. Every node is the same, as Adrian mentioned, but you might hit the gateway node, but in order to, the controller of that particular range of data, as we call it, so let's say there are 3 ranges of data, I want to insert data into the second range, that range might not exist on the gateway node. So the gateway node knows where that leaseholder is, and it will redirect the write to there, or the read. So you might not hit the node that you need, but the gateway node will always know where to go in order to get the database. So you're never making a stupidly high number of hops. Awesome. Right, let's do the next one. So the next table is events, and I'm not going to do anything with this one. I'm happy to leave that as regional by row in the regional by table in the primary region, because this one's an admin table, and more often than not, it'll be administered from the states. So I think it makes sense to keep that where it is.
It will be read, like, so whenever we go to the dashboard makes a select by slug and pulls that out. So
but you're typically in the States, and you're the only one reading from that information. Is that right?
Well, if we have an event in the UK or in Europe, then it's going to have to make that query to pull the information about the event to display it on the dashboard.
But I think in this instance, I'm not going to make any changes, because more often than not, like, this is being set up at the moment for US-based events, and it'll be read from the US. Mm-hmm. But we can always change the topologies. We can, if we decide that this topology isn't working for us, with a couple of statements, as you can see, we can change it super easy, and the data physically moves depending on those topologies. So I think that will be fine to leave it as is for now. The next one is going to be charities. I'm going to make this one global, because essentially UNICEF is UNICEF, whether you're in the States or whether you're in wherever else. So I'm going to make that global. And something I didn't show in the users table, but I can show here, because it's the same thing. If I show the create table, but I only care about the actual statement itself, if I run that, you'll see now that locality is global. And if I run it for the users, it'll be locality regional by row. So that one's done.
So what happens whenever you mark a table as global?
Good question, and thank you, because I forgot to say. So I'll swap back over to my other window, because I've diagrammatized it, if that is a word. So let's...
I mean, we love a good diagram.
So over here, so regional by row is what we created first, and we've asked Cockroach DB to pin the data. So this is a specific type of, let's say, US-based data. This is London-based or EU-based data, which is stored in London, and this is APAC data stored in Mumbai. Global data, so the global tables topology, Cockroach DB will distribute the data globally, so that it can be read quickly from wherever you are in the world. So, for example, if you had a very generic table that you wanted fast reads from wherever you were, global tables works well, at the cost of slower writes. Cockroach will want to make a cross-region replication when you make a write. So it's just a trade-off. I want my data. Let's say this is a primarily read-heavy table. Global tables makes sense if we're reading it from around the world. And the region by table in the primary region, which we did for the events table, that just keeps data to one region. So I'll switch back over to my terminal again now.
Yeah, nice. So the charities table is something where, an admin will add a charity, and so that's going to be very few writes. So we're only writing whenever we add a charity, but the majority of what we're going to be doing is reading from that table to pull information out and display it on the dashboard screen. So yeah, makes sense.
And I'll do the same for the many-to-many resolving table, the charities events. The events is primary, regional by table in the primary region, but charities is global. As this is just a resolver table, I think it makes sense to just make this global as well. There's no drawback to that. And then I'll be changing the donations table. So let's have a look at the donations table as it is at the moment. So I'm grouping by the source, which is in this case a web form, and we've got 117 donations according to this table. Let's see. So I do want to make this regional by row, because we're going to be writing to this from the event we're at. So if we're running an event in Mumbai or close to Mumbai, it makes sense to have fast writes there, because we're potentially doing it quite a lot of times during the course of an event.
It's going to be very write heavy.
Exactly. So I'll run that, which will change the locality to regional by row. It will create the CRDB region, CRDB internal region column.
Mm-hmm. And that's another column that we need to, as the developer, make sure that we populate.
As a developer, you'd need to make sure that it gets populated, but maybe not necessarily from the front end. You might want to inject it as an environment variable or something like that. But yes, it is something to be aware of. You can set it to be defaulted to the nearest region, I think, which is how data rehoming works. So if, for example, I'm in the UK, but I move to the States,
right.
I can set up rehoming such that when I make the first update to my row, it physically rehomes the data in the States.
Okay.
So that looks like this now. So we've now added a CRDB region, which is by default the primary region, because that's how the locality works. If I show you the create table though.
And as we're doing this, CockroachDB is working to replicate and move data to where we're saying it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So this one is locality regional by row, and you can see that it's created a CRDB region column for us that didn't exist before, and that is of type CRDB internal region. So it's basically an enumeration which says it has to be one of these three values, the three values that exist across the cluster, the regions, but it will default it to the primary region. So
is that a hidden?
East one.
Is that a hidden field?
By default, it is hidden. It's not visible, but you can surface it up. You can change it to be visible if you want to. It's just an implementation detail.
Sure.
The last table we're going to do is going to be leads. So if I select the data again from this table, or rather select no data but the columns, again we've got PII in here, personally identifiable information, and we'll also be making, this is also going to be quite a write heavy table. So it makes sense for performance benefits, make sure that data can be read to and basically consumed quickly. So I'll make that regional by row.
What happens to regional data if all the nodes in that region goes down?
So if the region becomes completely unavailable, the other regions will continue to work as is, but if there are no reads to service anything from that particular region, the region can be considered offline. And then because everything's hosted on Kubernetes, CockroachDB will realize anyway, and it will restart the pods, so the region will come back up again. But let's say in the case of the US East 1 outage the other day, that was for Lambda, but let's say it were to affect something to do with EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. If that went down for US East 1, if we didn't have another region within our super region, we would experience an outage. So therefore, it makes sense that's why by default, without super regions, CockroachDB will attempt to kind of replicate across multiple regions.
Yeah. So if you have an application, if you have an application that you want to make sure it stays up, like inside this, like the way that we have it set up now, inside the super region, you would want multiple regions. So right now we just have, like in the US, we have US East 1, but if we wanted it to be a little bit more resilient, we could add, US West 1. So you'd see a little bit of latency, but that region would still be up.
Right? Potentially, but the data would be, and the leaseholders would be replicated across both, so it would actually be negligible.
Okay.
So I'll show you. So this is the final state of the data. We've got 2 global tables. We've got 3 regional by row tables, and we've got 1 table that is regional by table in the primary region. We've got 1 view as well, which I'm not going to look at, but that's group donations. That's again another admin thing, which I'll skip over. What I'd now like to do before we switch back over to Aydrian is show you what everything looks like now under the hood. So if I look at the replicas, we can see that there are 3 replicas in each super region. So replicas 6, 7, and 9 correlate to US East 1. So all of these are US East 1. 1, 2, and 8 correspond to the Mumbai region, and none of those are London or the States. And 3, 4, and 5 relate to the London-based thing. So that's what a regional by row table looks like. And if I do regional by table in the primary region, you'll see that there's 1. and that corresponds to 679, which is East 1, because we asked it to be regional by table in the primary region only. And finally, I'll show you what a global table looks like. So there are 5 replicas, but they're spread out around the world. So we have one in Mumbai, we have one in London, and we've got some in the US as well. So that has distributed the table globally. So let's see what the query performance is like now. So if I do a select against the charities table, this is a global table. It takes now 13 milliseconds, whereas before it would have taken a lot longer. But now it's nice and snappy because the data is in my region as well. It's global. If I do select first name from users, in fact, so that's still quite a slow query. If I do the same for my region, 40 milliseconds. Again, the data is where I am. If I look at events, we're probably looking at the 80 millisecond mark, again, because I've had to make the request to the primary region, which is in the States. And if I look at, if you remember earlier, I showed you where we were seeing replication violations. If I do that again now, we can see that CockroachDB has, because I've told it to essentially restrict the placement of replicas, we don't have any violations anymore. It's come right down. So everything for the US is in the US, and ad infinitum. So that's the database side of things done. So do you want to start by, do you want to share your screen and we'll rewire the application to go global? Or at least
yes.
talk to the global database?
Okay, so do I need to change the database URL from the one that you gave me earlier, or is that still working?
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Just again, for transparency, we tried it earlier because it makes sense to know what you're about to do.
Well, also I
So,
want
yeah,
to I want to not show my .m file.
Yeah, which is always a good idea.
It's never fun to spill your secrets on a stream. So yeah. So let's go back over to me. Hi. So here is what I've done is while Rob was talking, I changed the database URL. So instead of pointing to my single node serverless cluster, I'm pointing to our multi-region cluster. And I fired up it locally. So this is all written in Remix. So I just did a nice npm run dev, started it up, and live is hard. Yep. And so I'll go ahead and sign in. And we were able to authenticate. You can see that we've got our data here still. And we can go in and take a look. Ooh, a beautiful location, test event, all of that. Let's go ahead and say test event updated and submit. And it updated, so that's working. So just right off the bat, changing the URL didn't change anything because we backed up the database and put it onto another one and switched the database.
It was reassuringly low impact and pretty stress-free.
Yeah. So is there anything else so what do I as the application developer need to do to make sure that everything is working as it should be with the multi-region? Because this is previously a single region app, so it only existed in US East 1.
So if you were to carry on if you were to swap the connection string out and use the database as it is, it would continue to work. Mm-hmm. You would see, if you had your iPad, as you mentioned, at an event that wasn't in the States, you would just see increased latencies. And that's because we're having to do more work now. And that's expected. Mm-hmm. We've made the database global, and there are responsibilities that come with that. If you've got a global audience, it makes sense to have a global database. So, but you have to know what that comes with. So I guess the next thing to do would be to make sure that your application itself is globally available. So that would be, maybe in the next stream, we'll introduce another region to the application, and we'll access, let's say from London, I'll have an iPad, you have an iPad, mm-hmm. and we'll both access the application and report our latencies. But I think that probably makes most sense next, because as mentioned earlier, if you just keep everything to a single region within your application, but your database is global, you're not going to be getting the benefits of the globally distributed database.
Yeah. So I know
Aside from the, sorry, you go.
Oh, I was like, so I know one of the next things that I'm going to do is now that I'm using multi-region database, I'm going to switch how I deploy the app to be more multi-region friendly. And I think I'm going to deploy it to fly.io because it's really easy to get that up and going and to add multiple regions as you need them. So I can start it deploying it to US East 1. I believe like the closest node is in New Jersey, which is kind of cool. And then, now that we have a multiple database, I can add another region in the UK to be closer to that database, and then if we spin up another one later and we see that we need the traffic, then we can just again add another region to our application deployment.
Yeah, but essentially, and most of the, or at least many of the regions that are available in the cloud providers, this happens to be based on AWS. So you may have noticed that the regions are prefixed with AWS. We also support GCP and Azure. So depending on where your workloads are, you've got access to most of the regions that are within the ecosystem of the hyperscalers anyway.
Right. And then
any more questions from anyone online?
I don't think so. I think we got those. And then kind of a preview of where this is going. Currently it's using Hasura to handle the real time, but to do it in kind of a more multi-region way and kind of keep it all with Cockroach DB, I'll be switching that to use the CDC webhook sync, which went GA with 23.1. And so hopefully it will be connecting in I mean it should be. This is my first time doing CDC as multi-region, but it will go webhook to the application, and then I'll use server-side events to push it to the front end. And so if you are sitting at an event, say in the UK, right, and we make that connection to CDC, it's going to be connecting to CDC on the local node, right, Rob?
So I was too busy getting back to a question, so I completely missed the question. Can you repeat?
That's okay. So if you're in the case where we're using CDC to push data to the front end to display on the dashboard, whenever it makes the connection to CDC, it's going to be connecting to the local node, correct?
Yes. So whatever's, are you talking about the, so the webhook will come from Cockroach DB, but that will be going out to, is the question, where does that webhook post?
So I'm just like, if when we switch this, it's going like it's going to be multi-region as well, right? Like the CDC is not going to be pushing from one region. It's going to use the closest node.
Yeah, it will. Yeah. CDC would be distributed as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
And on the question of stored procs, yeah, they're not supported at the moment, but they are in the pipeline. Okay. We do support, so being Postgres compatible, we do support user-defined functions now. But as they come, they'll enter a period of beta, then early preview, and things like that. So the functionality will continue to get richer as time goes on. But stored procs are in the pipeline under the umbrella of distributed functions. So in that is user-defined functions, UDFs, store procedures, and triggers. UDFs has landed, but the other two are still in the pipeline.
Nice. So this was pretty straightforward. We will make sure that we put links in the description afterwards to Rob's video, any of the documentation that we used from Cockroach DB docs, so that way you have it. Let's go back to I'll go back to the chatting view. See what I can't imagine how that's going to work under the hood. So I feel like they say one of the hardest problems in computer science is databases, and I think another one is distributed systems. And here at Cockroach Labs, we are taking on both of those problems at the same time. So I want to take a minute to talk about, we had 23.1 that was just released. So at Cockroach Labs, we do 2 major releases a year. So the other one will happen sometime in the late fall, winter, around I think November. But is there anything from 23.1 that you're excited about, Rob, that you'd like to mention?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is serverless. I love that I can spin up a completely free cluster, global cluster. So I have a personal Cockroach DB serverless cluster that costs me nothing and is deployed across 6 regions around the world.
Yeah.
Obviously, it costs Cockroach DB to run, but the cost is actually quite negligible because it's all run in Kubernetes, and the pods only exist if there's need for them. So Cockroach knows if your application is under, or the database is under load, so it will spin up. So you can always handle the scale, and it will always make sure that there are at least 100 requests per second available to you, even if you've hit your spend limit. So it's really flexible, and it's a really good way to get into Cockroach DB if you've not played with it before, because you can spin up a cluster. It's enterprise. It has the features that are available in enterprise. Most of them, it follows the features follow behind dedicated somewhat. But yeah, I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited about. Also, the support for Azure is really interesting, or Azure. Yeah. Sorry, if some people are if I'm saying it wrong. We previously didn't support it. Now we do. So anyone who prefers to be on that stack can now use us from within the cloud area. You could have always used self-hosted and deployed your Cockroach DB nodes wherever you wanted, across cloud providers if needs be, and hybrid cloud. So you could have had them running on all clouds and on a Raspberry Pi if you wanted. Probably not advisable, but
yeah. And so in the chat we have the free tier supports multi-region. Wow. And yeah, it's just Cockroach DB serverless. We don't so much consider it a free tier. We give you free allowances. So there's I can't remember what the number is for how many.
10 gigabytes, 10 gigs of storage.
Okay.
I don't know if it'd be called gigabyte months. I don't know, but 10 gigabytes. Anything you go over, I think it's I can't remember exactly what it is. I think it's 50 cents per additional something or other. The pricing is very transparent though.
Yeah.
And you get 50 million request units per month. There's documentation on what a request unit is, but essentially, if you think creating a connection to a Cockroach DB database might consume 4, a very simple read against one row in a table might be 1 or 1.2 or something like that. So you get 50 million a month, and you accrue them as the month goes on, but you can blast through them all if you want, in which case you go back to the steady 100 requests per second limit,
right?
Which is, I believe, how it works.
And what keeps it so affordable is, the serverless has elastic scale, so it can expand to fit whatever your load happens to be in whatever region. But the cool part is it will actually also go the other way and scale all the way down to 0. So if you're not using it, then you're not paying for it. And this is really nice for people who are wanting to start out with multi-region, because if you set up all of these different regions, but you're not using 3 of them, then you're not paying for them. They're just there for whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah, you only pay for what you use. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So lots of cool stuff that came out.
Yeah.
I think we did really well on time.
I think we blasted through. Yeah. I think for the next one we'll keep an hour just in case, but I think we'll use whatever we need of it, and then scale to 0.
And scale to 0.
And that means turning off the stream, I presume.
Yeah. But I guess last thing, are there any cool videos that are coming out from you, Rob? I know that since you've been here, you've been pumping out a lot of videos. You can see those on our YouTube channel, where you already are. So after this is over, go check out our different playlists and look for the videos from Rob. But what's coming up?
So I've got a backlog of videos that I'd like to do. One of the next ones is going to be migrations. So from, for example, Cockroach serverless to dedicated, there becomes a break-even point at which point, let's say your Cockroach DB serverless database is receiving sufficient traffic that actually a dedicated cluster would make more sense for you. You can migrate. You can migrate you can migrate serverless to serverless, dedicated to dedicated to serverless to dedicated. It doesn't matter. But I'll be showing the process of that, and also migrate off legacy technologies. I'll be showing how to migrate from other databases technologies into Cockroach DB as well. So there's a lot to come, but I take requests. So as we've discussed, if there's anything that is confusing us and I need to go away and figure out, I write a video about it, because I don't have to figure it out again, and I don't want other people to have to. If there's a video that explains it nicely, I'll record it. So any requests would be appreciated as well.
Yeah, so feel free to put any requests in the comments of this, or as you can see, our Twitter handles are listed under our names. Feel free to shout out at us. If you have any questions that you would like to be answered on the stream, you can tweet those out and use the hashtag distributed tea time, and we will get to them on the next stream. What do we got here? Be really
Agreed.
cool to have physical example of the cluster failing over, like have 3 NUCs on a table and just unplug one and just abuse the cluster. So
we
yeah,
could set up we could do that. I've got a Raspberry Pi, you've got a NUC.
Yeah.
We could probably we could connect them somehow, and then we'd need another person. We'd need another volunteer. I think KF may have inadvertently volunteered. But I'm sure there's something we could do to do that, because yeah, you're right. Seeing something in the terminal is a lot less visceral than seeing it live. And yeah, if you stamp on a Raspberry Pi and see what happens to the rest of the infrastructure, it'd be interesting.
We also have a really cool demo that we do at events where we spin up Cube Doom, and so the little aliens that are, so it's Doom, if you remember Doom the video game, the original one. The aliens running around are actual clusters, and as you kill them, the node goes down, and so you can actually see. We have another screen that's got the database console, and it's showing. We have a workload going, and you can see that like it never really goes down, but you can also see like when the node dies and like when it comes back up and recovers and then rejoins the cluster. So that's a really cool demo that we do like at events, and so people are just like killing all the things.
There's 2 points on that. I think they're demons, and the second point is I had a second point, but I was so happy and smug with my first point, I forgot my second point. It's available online, so you could just go to GitHub and download Cube Doom and play with it yourself.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been I've enjoyed our inaugural stream. Thank you everyone who joined us.
Yes, and we look forward to seeing you. I believe next Friday. I mean, we're doing this every Friday. Next Friday, and we'll figure out what we're doing. But look for the tweet from Cockroach DB. We'll also put it on the subreddit, and then you'll also be able to come back to YouTube and see when we have this scheduled. But yeah, thanks for joining us. And as our colleague Paul says, TTF it. Ta-ta for now.
I was wondering if you'd... See you later, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, bye.